Hello friends. Do you know what your son does in the evenings when he says he is going to the disco or fishing? No? I am far from the truth to think that he smokes and drinks port with his cronies. All this would be too conspicuous, but who knows, maybe he is assembling a nuclear reactor in the workshop. At the entrance to the town 25 kilometers from Detroit in the US state of Michigan, there is a large sign on which is written in large letters, "We have a lot of children, but we still save them, so drivers, drive carefully." The warning is completely unnecessary. Foreigners are very rare here and locals don't drive that fast. The workers of the Environmental Protection Agency planned the cleaning of the backyard of the property privately owned by Mr. Michal Potlask for the night hours, so late at night the residents were already asleep and things from the barn could be taken away without causing panic. Which containers with the inscription, "Beware of radiation," usually cause in the civilian population. By morning, workers loaded the last blocks from the barn into containers and loaded all the cargo onto trucks. Until the age of 10, David Haan grew up as an ordinary American teenager. His parents, Ken and Petty, divorced. David lived with his father and his new wife in Clinton Township, visiting his mother on weekends. She had enough problems of her own. Her new husband was a heavy drinker and she didn't have much time for her son. The only person who understood the teenager's soul was his step-grandfather. Katie's father, who gave the young scout a thick book called The Golden Book of Chemical Experiments for his 10th birthday. The book was written in simple language and explained in an understandable way how to set up a home laboratory, how to make artificial silk, alcohol, and the like. David was so fascinated by chemistry that he started studying his father's college textbooks within the next 2 years. The parents were delighted with their son's new hobby. Meanwhile, David has set up a pretty decent chemistry lab in his bedroom. As he got older, his attempts became far more daring. At 13 he was already producing gunpowder himself and at 14 nitroglycerin. Fortunately, David himself was not harmed in his attempts. But his bedroom was almost destroyed. The windows were blown out and the built-in wardrobe was pushed into the wall and the wallpaper and ceiling were hopelessly ruined. As punishment, David was whipped by his father and the laboratory, or rather what was left of it, had to be moved to the basement. And here the boy went full blast. Here he was no longer controlled, and he could smash, blow up, and destroy to the point that his chemical soul would rot. The pocket money for the experiments was no longer enough, and the boy began to earn his own money. He did dishes in a bistro, worked in a warehouse and general store. Meanwhile, the explosions in the basement were increasing in strength and frequency. In order to save the house from destruction, David was given an ultimatum. Either he moves on to less dangerous experiments or his basement lab is shut down. The threat took hold and the family lived a peaceful life for a whole month until one late afternoon a massive explosion shook the house. Ken rushed to the basement where he found his son unconscious with a burnt eyebrow. A compact of red phosphorus, which David was trying to crush with a screwdriver, exploded. From then on, all experimentation in the father of the property was strictly prohibited. David had another spare lab in his mother's barn. This is where the main events took place. David's father claims that scouting and his son's ambition are to blame. At all costs, he wanted to earn the highest badge of honor of the Eagle Scout. According to the rules, he had to earn 21 merit badges, 11 of which were for mandatory skills and 10 for achievements in any field chosen by the scout himself. On the 10th of May 1991, 14-year-old David submitted to his scout leader the work he had written to receive a special merit badge on atomic energy. In its preparation, David asked for help from Westinghouse Electric and the American nuclear company Edison Electric Institute, as well as companies involved in the management of nuclear power plants. He was met with sincere understanding and support everywhere. The booklet included a nuclear reactor model made from an aluminum beer can, a clothes hanger, kitchen matches, and 3 garbage bags. All this was too little for the young and gifted scout with a strong interest in nuclear issues. Therefore, 15-year-old David decided to take the next step, which was to build a real nuclear reactor. He built a fission reactor in his mother's barn for 2 years. How did this teenager learn to build such a thing? And where did he get the necessary material? It was all very simple. David pretended to be a university professor. First he called the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, where they described in detail how to make the individual parts of the reactor and how to isolate the radioactive material, so that David could get these very materials. So he called and wrote to various agencies that they sent in small batches. David also bought 200 smoke detectors to get the americium from here. He invested $1,000 in batteries, which he used as a source of lithium to obtain thorium from the incandescent filaments of the light bulb. It was a little easier with radium. Until the late 1960s, radium was applied to clock hands and flight instrument alarms. So David went on a trip to the junkyard and to the antique store. As soon as he found something phosphorescent, he didn't hesitate to buy it. The old watch wasn't worth much, so he carefully scraped the paint into a special bottle. The work was extremely slow and could have taken months if David hadn't happened to be driving his old Pontiac 6000 down the street in his hometown when he noticed that their installed Gadra computer on the dashboard suddenly started blinking and beeping. A short search for the source of the radioactive signal led him to an antique shop. Here he found an old clock that had the entire face painted with radio. After paying $10, he took it home. The results exceeded all expectations. In addition to the painted dial, he found a full bottle of radium dye hidden on the back of the watch. It was more complicated with uranium. This substance is not freely available. However, David was not deterred. He wrote to a company in Czechoslovakia that sold this substance to universities listed on a special list. David introduced himself as a professor from a research lab that needs uranium for scientific purposes. A European company sent samples of suitable ore without blinking an eye. Beryllium for the production of neutrons was stolen by David's friend from the laboratory where he worked, and now it was the turn of the reactor itself. David, who was 17 at the time, decided to use the collected material without worrying about safety, so he mixed americium, irradium, aluminum and beryllium in powder and wrapped the infernal mixture in aluminum foil. The resulting sphere was covered alternately with cubes of thorium ash and uranium powder. Also wrapped in foil, and the entire structure was covered with a thick layer of adhesive tape. Of course, the reactor was far from what could be considered an industrial model, producing no appreciable heat, but its ionizing radiation increased not over days but over hours. Soon the radiation level increased to such an extent that David's installed computer began beeping within 5 blocks of his mother's house. David installed cobalt drills in place of the graphite rods, but they didn't help him much. The process has become uncontrollable. That's when David realized that he had collected too much radioactive material in one place and it was time to stop playing games like that. He dismantled his reactor. He stored the individual materials in a toolbox. He left the radium and americium in the cellar and decided to take all the auxiliary material to the forest in his Pontiac. August 31, 1994, Clintoship police received a call from an unknown person who reported that someone was trying to steal hoods from a car. The unknown person turned out to be David, who explained to the police that he was just waiting for a friend. Such an explanation was not enough for the police, and they asked him to open the trunk of his car. They found a lot of strange things there. Broken clocks, wires, mercury switches, technical reagents, and about 50 wrapped packets of an unknown powder. However, the box with the vacuum lock attracted the most attention. When the police asked to open it, David replied that he could not because the contents of the box were highly radioactive. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the district police department was informed that local police in the state of Michigan stopped a vehicle with an explosive device, possibly a nuclear bomb. The next morning, pyrotechnicians arrived and, after inspecting the car, assured local headquarters that it was not, in fact, an explosive device, but were immediately shocked by the news that the car contained a large amount of radioactive material. Until almost 1 year after David's closure, the Environmental Protection Agency obtained court order to demolish the barn. The parents of the radioactive scout had to pay $60,000 for its dismantling and storage of radioactive waste in a landfill. After liquidating the barn, David fell into a deep depression. All his work was in vain. Members of the scout troop refused to award the Eagle, saying that his attempts were of no use to the people, and an atmosphere of suspicion and undesirability prevailed around him. Relations with parents were irretrievably damaged after paying the fine. After David successfully completed his studies at the university, the father gave his son a new ultimatum: either David joins the armed forces or his father kicks him out of the house. David Haan served as a sergeant on the U.S. Navy's nuclear aircraft carrier Enterprise, but due to his merits in the past, he is not allowed to approach the nuclear reactor to avoid possible inconvenience. On the shelf in his cabin are books on steroids, melanin, genetics, nuclear reactors, amino acids, and criminal law. I am sure that my experiments and experiences did not cost me more than 5 years of life, he tells journalists who visit them now and then, so I still have time to do something useful for people. And I would answer him, no, thank you, we'll figure it out somehow, and that's all for today. If you liked the video, don't forget to subscribe. See you soon.